Call Admin and Finance meeting to order. And can we have a roll call, please?
Dr. Beebe?
Here.
Dr. Beebe is present. Ms. Bofi?
Here.
Ms. Bofi is present. Ms. Bradford? Ms. Bradford is not present. I know she's here. Mr. Garvey? Mr. Garvey is present. Mr. Gio?
Present.
Mr. Gio is present. Ms. Hill? Ms. Hill is not present. Mr. Lee? Mr. Lee is present. Dr. Morante?
She's here. She just stepped out.
Dr. Morante is present. Ms. Orange Jones? Ms. Orange Jones is not present. Mr. Romer? Here. Mr. Romer is present. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Okay, first item.
The consent agenda is ready for approval, but we will be adding item 6.1 to consent, but we will be pulling items 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, 3.1, and 3.3 due to public comment.
Okay, do I have a motion to that effect?
So move.
Ms. Bofi, a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Romer? Any objection to that motion to remove those from the consent agenda? Okay, motion carries. First item.
On page 1, item 2.1, consideration of a report from the LDE Director of Internal Audit. The recommendation is to receive.
Do I have a motion to receive?
So moved.
Mr. Romer, second?
Second.
Mr. Lee? We do have one comment card. I would ask if there is any discussion from the board on this item. Okay, Ms. Berrios?
Really, this is more information. Lee Barrios, retired from St. Tammany Parish. On your website, your last financial report for the Department of Ed is 2009-2010, unless I'm mistaken. If you correct me, and I wondered when it's going to be updated and how long it takes to update the website. Also, when will the 2013 reports for districts, which were due September 30th, be posted? And also, on your annual reports, and the last one was 2011-2012, and that's for schools, I believe. You don't list certification for teachers, only whether they're degreed or not, or the level of degree. And I wonder if that can be adjusted to show the type of certification that the teachers have. Since we don't have the teachers' names, and we can't check that ourselves. So there's 3 questions. The last financial report for the Department of Ed is 2009 and 10, so it makes it very difficult to follow this.
Ms. Barrios, would it be acceptable you have 3, specific questions that we'll just take those and then we'll get a response to you?
All right, that's my, you're going to get it to me later?
Yes.
Okay, so do you have those, or do I need to see the secretary?
What is that?
Do you have those then recorded, or do I need to see the secretary after?
I think they have it. If you would give them the list, that way we'll know they'll have the right information and get you specifically what you're looking for.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any further discussion on 2.1? Any objection? Motion carries. Next item.
On page 2, item 2.2, consideration of grants allocations of $1 million or less approved by the State Superintendent of Education, the Chair of the Administration and Finance Committee, and the BESE President. The recommendation is to receive.
Do I have a motion to receive the report? So, Ms. Beebe, a second? Second. Mr. Lee. I would, on this particular item, since it's been pulled, is to compliment, this is an appropriation from the legislature. The regions that's being funded are really poor regions of the state, and Senator Thompson, Senator Donahue, and Representative Fannin were very instrumental in making this happen, and I'd like to publicly thank them for that. We do have one comment card from Ms. Berrios. 2.2. Okay. Pass. Any further discussion? Dr. Beebe?
I just need clarification. There is item number 3. And according to what is documented, there is an amount of 0. Was that just an oversight, or why $0 appropriated?
This is a the Recovery School District received funding for a student. This is for a pool of funds, the high-risk pool, that go towards students that have significant exceptionalities, such that they're very expensive to provide services for. And in this case, the RSD received these high-risk funds for a student attending a Type 5 charter school, but the student has since transferred to an Orleans Parish school, so the money needs to be allocated to follow the student. So we requested an interim approval to align the funding of this student with the student transfer. So it says $0 essentially because $0 are going. There's no change. This is just a reallocation. There's no net gain or loss.
But there has to be a dollar amount that accompanies the child, as I understand.
There is. That the board already awarded that allocation. We could get what the dollar amount is, but all we're doing is essentially reallocating those funds from the school where the kid was to the school where the kid now is.
Well, for the sake of transparency, I think we should include it.
Any further discussion? Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
On page 13, item 2.3, consideration of LDE contracts of $50,000 and under approved by the State Superintendent of Education. The recommendation is to receive.
Do I have a motion to receive? Ms. Bradford, second.
Second.
Ms. Bophy? Any discussion by board members? We have one public comment. Ms. Berrios?
Lee Berrios, St. Tammany Parish. My question is, what is the status of course choice? You've got 3 contracts here totaling about $90,000 for counselors to counsel people into course choice, and I wondered what the status. Is it going to be funded? I guess I missed something. And how is it going to be funded? And also, I had a question for the contract for almost $50,000 for a contractor to develop and document recommendations for possible improvements in the operational processes between and among the areas of student programs management, finance, and human resources. Is that for the Department of Ed, or is that for a school district?
And I take the chairman's guidance as to whether I should answer all these questions on a one-off basis, but I'll just briefly answer this. One is, yes, it is for the Department of Ed. 2, course choice is providing courses to kids as we speak. And it has been funded by the Department of Education.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Dr. Beebe?
Just to kind of piggyback off of Ms. Barrios, it appears that every BESE meeting we're asked to approve these contracts for course choice providers. I mean, when does it end? I mean, I can appreciate her concern, and I share the concern. And just as I know within my district, I have a certain X number of dollars, and I have to live within my means. And with the staff I have to make things happen. And we continuously, every BESE meeting, and I think you will all acknowledge that I'm speaking factually, that we're asked to approve contracts.
That's no different from any other school system. We have a set amount of money. That amount of money was actually cut by 10% last year, so we're trying to make the best with what we have. And yes, that does involve spending money to provide services for kids. In this case, there are 4 counselors. Those counselors provide counseling services to families. They need to be paid for doing that.
But, as I said, I'll reiterate, every BESE meeting, we're approving dollars to have these counselors in place. And I don't know that the course choice program is that extensive that it would require all of these resources. That's my point.
Any further discussion on the item? Any objection? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 32, item 2.4, consideration of RSD contracts of $50,000 and under, approved by the State Superintendent of Education. The recommendation is to receive.
Do I have a motion to receive? Ms. Bradford, second. Mr. Lee? Any discussion on this item relative to RSD contracts,
I do.
50,000 and under?
Superintendent White, you can make reference to this. The First Choice Therapy Program, which offer occupational therapy and physical therapy for students with disabilities, this $32,000 amount grant.
Which page are you on, Ms. Hill?
33.
Okay. I'm just trying to find it.
Okay. Can you explain to me, is this particular occupational therapist or physical therapist is for all, going to cover all the schools in RSD, Louisiana, or just particular schools?
This is for a set of high schools in the Baton Rouge area, set of schools in the Baton Rouge area. As with other school systems, the Recovery School District contracts with evaluators to provide physical and occupational evaluations of students, and that's what this is. This pays for part-time licensed physical therapists, part-time occupational therapists in those schools.
Okay. And then my next concern is the New Teach Project. Now, we're granting them $38,000, and my concern would be, Ms. Beebe's concern is that every time we have a board meeting, we're approving funding for the New Teach Project, which duplicates services that TFA is currently doing, recruiting teachers, training, and things of that nature, which I feel that we can put this funding into more occupational therapists, into more counselors and social workers in the RSD.
Ms. Hill, do you
schools.
have specific information on what the duplication is?
Yes. I mean, the New Teach Project, their job is to contract to recruit, select, train.
But I mean specific instances that you're referring to?
Yes. For example, we approve the TFA contracts. In return, those same contracts, we're recruiting teachers. TFA is up to go out to recruit teachers, to train teachers. So my concern is, in the last board meeting, the New Teacher Project had a contract that we amended. The meeting before that, the New Teacher Project had a contract that we amended.
So
those
what is the specific duplication you're referring to?
recruitment of teachers.
You
to
have
train
a
them.
specific teacher in mind, or
No, I
or
have no
school?
specific teacher in mind at all. But what I have is that we're duplicating services, and when you look at the Recovery School District, the need is, we need more counselors, we need more occupational therapists to reach those kids. So that is my concern.
I understand. I agree with you. The more counselors, the better. We do need teachers also, and this pays for teachers.
No, I understand your
Yeah.
point, but I'm just saying that we'll keep funding the same organizations over and over again for the same exact reason, and that we have additional resources that needs to be in these schools. I go visit these schools in New Orleans and in Baton Rouge, and these kids need help. Yes, they do need a teacher, but they can't be successful academically if their social and emotional needs are not met. That is my point.
Any further, Ms. Dr. Beebe?
Yes, and to echo Ms. Hill's concern, isn't the Department of Ed staff, I would think that they have some responsibility to the RSD, and the fact is there is a teacher pipeline whereby individuals throughout the state are, I mean, it's a website. They can go online and they can apply. And, you know, there is some responsibility within districts to recruit and retain. And 38,000, I'd like to have that job to find 7 highly qualified teachers and to recruit and train. I mean, this is money that could be going directly to the classroom. And again, the New Teacher Project, isn't that an operation located in New York? And we don't have anybody in Louisiana to recruit and train. What about the network team leaders? I mean, I don't think we are using our resources to the best of our abilities to positively impact student outcomes. That's what I hear. We're charged with producing positive student outcomes. And it's not my intent to be confrontational at every meeting, but I do bear some responsibility in being fiscally responsible. And I don't think that we are being fiscally responsible and even being of being responsible to students who truly need services. We have children out there who need some social psychology interventions, and you know, we have children out there in need, and yet every BESE meeting we are asked to approve high dollar contracts. I mean, 38,000, 38.5, in my opinion, that's a lot of money for 7 teachers.
Just to recruit.
Any further discussion? One public comment, Ms. Berrios.
Lee Berrios, St. Tammany. I also question that particular contract, $38,500 to recruit 7 teachers. And if I'm not mistaken, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, the New Teacher Project does not take applications from certified experienced teachers. It seems like I checked that once. Also, what kind of training do they go through? Why are we paying an employment agency, the New Teacher Project, which is nonprofit, I think, but also makes money off of every grant, every federal and every state dollar that goes through it, in addition to being paid to recruit? I really object to that, and I think the public should object, because these are not even certified teachers that they're recruiting. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Any objection to the motion?
I object.
Dr. Beebe. Motion carries. Next item.
Page 38, item 3.1, consideration of quarterly report of expenditures and budget balances of 8G projects for FY 2012-2013. The recommendation is to receive.
Do I have a recommendation to receive the report? Ms. Bradford, second.
Second.
Ms. Bofi. Any discussion on receiving the report?
I'd like to make a reference to
Yes,
personal
ma'am.
privilege. When you look at the AG grants, I'm kind of, my concern is that when we formulated the AG advisory committee, which is appointed by individuals from each board members, we also have a work group that consists of board members. And what's so disheartening to me is that we have a work group that consists of board members, but not every board member was invited to participate in that work group.
Now, Ms. Hill,
I understand.
this is 2012, this is last year's.
I understand,
Okay.
but this personal privilege time, that's what I asked for. And so I just wanted to make that point, since we're on the AG grants, and even though it's for the 2012-2013 fiscal year, which we have some coming for 2013-2014 fiscal year, I just want to make that point that you have board members that want to be involved, but not having the opportunity to even be asked to be a part of a work group or an extra committee. So I just want to make that point, because I think that's disheartening. And as we all board members, we have to do a service to our community. So that's it.
Any other discussion on this item? We do have one comment card, Ms. Berrios.
Lee Berrios, St. Tammany. One of the questions I have is, it's listed, this for 2012-13, that the LEAP testing, and I wonder if that includes iLEAP, but the LEAP testing costs $2,565,000. And I wonder if the department has an estimate of what all the testing that the department is paying for this year will cost for the year, this coming year.
Are you requesting that as a specific request for
Yes,
information?
if the answer isn't available right now.
Yeah, what I would do is let's give that to the staff, and I'm sure they'd be happy to get
Okay,
that
thank
information for you. You're welcome. Any further discussion? Any objection to receiving the report? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 68, item 3.3, consideration of the minutes of the BESE retreat held on August 12, 2013. Recommendation is to receive.
Do I have a recommendation to receive?
So moved.
Ms. Bofi, a second. Ms. Morante, Dr. Ramonte. Any objection? Motion carries. Oh, I'm sorry, we have, Ms. Barrios, you have one comment card.
Lee Barrios, St. Tammany. At the last meeting, you discussed some of the events or some of the things that you discussed at that retreat. One of them was policies for open meetings. And Mr. Romer isn't, oh yes he is here. Mr. Romer, if you remember, you said that, or you charged, I believe, the department to look into your policy of allowing proxies on the council meetings. And according to state law, open meetings are not allowed to have proxy votes. And therefore, I lost my open meetings lawsuit based on that, because they said that the AG said that the council meetings were not open meeting laws because they did have proxies. Has anything been done about that?
Ms. Cope, I've gotten your emails and I've been asking staff to follow up, so let me get an update real quick.
Okay, and are you going to hold them as though they were open meetings in spite of the fact that the AG said they're not open meetings?
Let me get an update from Ms. Cope.
Heather Cope, Executive Director of BESE, and Patricia Wilton, our Assistant Attorney General, is also here to speak to this. So proxies are not allowed in public bodies such as yourselves. None of you could have proxies.
Ms. Cope, could you?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Proxy votes are not allowed for public bodies, which includes the board, so you all cannot have proxies when you all meet and vote. For the Superintendent's Advisory Council or any other advisory council, the proxy issue is allowed from our understanding. And when we brought forward rules for the BESE code in August for you all to review, and we made some amendments, part of that review was having legal look at the proxy situation for our advisory councils, and it was found to be permissible for advisory councils because they are not public bodies like the board is, or like the Board of Regents, or I'm trying to think of another example. Anything else?
Ms. Barris, does that answer your question?
Yes, so I guess I'll refile my lawsuit since now we know that that in fact the AG was incorrect about that. My second question is...
Hold on one second, Ms. Barris.
I don't understand what you mean by incorrect.
Would the AG's office like to respond to that?
We issued an opinion and we stand by the opinion.
Okay.
Obviously, anyone's welcome to challenge that.
Okay.
And I guess just to clarify as well, we conduct our advisory council meetings as open meetings. Members of the public are invited to come. Open meetings laws does require the board to notice any of our advisory council meetings, which we do, and we follow the law in that regard. There are certain exemptions that are allowed for private citizen advisory groups, which SAC and our other advisory councils are, but we do follow any other open meetings law requirement, and the board has actually asked us to go above and beyond what open meetings laws requires for our advisory council meetings.
Thank you, Ms. Cope. Ms. Barris?
Okay, and in this
Mr.
particular
Gio.
situation, the SACS committee did not allow public comment, and that's why I filed a suit. Then my next question is, you also discussed ethics in your retreat, and I also have written to the board in the last couple of days questioning or requesting that an ethics, I guess an ethics, that the ethics board be asked to look into the new situation of Miss Orange Jones, whose job is increased or expanded for Teach for America, to revisit that issue. And also I question whether or not Ms. Holly Boffey, who is employed full-time by the Council for Chief School State Officers, who along with the NGO created the Common Core. To me, that's a conflict of interest, at least in discussing anything having to do with the Common Core.
So is that so you're going to file that with the Ethics Commission? Is that what you're saying? Is this a statement or a question, or?
I'm wondering if you wouldn't. I think it's your responsibility to hold each other accountable as the board, but if you're not willing to, yes, I would like to. Do you have any response, though, to my email about that?
I didn't receive it, and I'm sure there will be. Your time's up. I appreciate your input. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Gio?
Yes.
My understanding is that the Ethics Board has looked at this issue and issued their comments on it already, so I don't think that there's any need to go into it further.
Thank you, Mr. Garvey. Next
Mr.
item.
Gio, I have a couple of things.
Ms. Melfi.
One is for the other board members about my employment. If you do a Google search with my name, it's pretty easy to find the advisory opinion from the Ethics Board. So for those of you who are interested in that, I think the opinion was issued on January 24th, 2012. But I did have some questions back to the open meetings, and I'm talking specifically about the Special Education Advisory Panel, which is a panel that I co-chair. So we hold it as an open meeting, and we allow public comment.
To clarify, the Special Ed Advisory Panel is a subgroup under the department, so I'm just less familiar in terms of the mechanics of that specific group, but
Okay.
I'll do my best to answer.
Well, I just want, if we're not doing something correctly, I want to know. So it's an open meeting. We have public comment. We have proxies who sit in. So I guess my question is, do the proxies sit in our meeting and they have discussions with us. So do they vote? And I don't know if Ms. Devlin wants to help us with that.
Since this group is under the department, they
Yeah.
have bylaws, so Bridget will know, Ms. Devlin will know better the bylaws of
Our
CETA.
bylaws that have been approved by the panel say that proxies cannot vote.
Cannot vote. Okay. And we're in line with open meeting laws with our bylaws. Okay. Perfect. Just want to make sure we're doing everything right. Thank you, ladies.
Dr. Morante.
Well, I was just wondering if they were proxies or alternates. That would make a difference.
I don't know.
For BESE advisory councils, it's proxies. I don't know for SEEP or anything else, it's
I think
proxies.
that's correct with special advisory as well.
Okay. Ms. Heather, I have a question for you. Sorry. For the AG work group, is that an open meeting or is that not an open meeting?
For the work group meetings among board members, they're meetings of board members. They're not public meetings like these are in the sense of you have a quorum of the board meeting. It's a functioning work group. I think if anybody wanted to come, they wouldn't be barred, but
Okay,
it's
so
just like it's a...
I guess my
active
concern
work
is
group.
because we're dealing with the magnitude of funding,
Sure.
taxpayer dollars.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure we have this work group, is the community invited to participate
Yeah.
and have discussion in reference to this work group?
So part of the timeline that the board approved around forming the 8G budget and program that you all are going to be considering a little later in this committee.
Correct.
We brought to the board based on your all's request to have more touch points with the public. So we added an extra 8G advisory council meeting to the timeline for the development of the 14-15 budget. So there were 2 opportunities for the public stakeholders, which are on the advisory council as well as members of the public, to see the agenda that we noticed, to come and engage in that process. And the work group, I don't want to speak for the board in terms of why it was created, but that was more an opportunity for board members to get together to come up with some ideas to bring to the public. And then also, the board has charged work groups in the past to workshop things for them to bring back. So it's not being done behind closed doors in the sense now you all are going to be looking at the proposal today to vote on and can vote it up or down or change it or whatever you want to do.
Okay, so I understand we have an AG advisory council.
Correct.
Which is appointed, where individuals are appointed by board members.
Yes, you each have a certain
Right,
number of
correct.
appointees. Yeah.
Which they meet twice a year, which is open to the public.
Yep.
However, we also have a work group, which consists of board members that will be taking on business in reference to the AG funding. In return, it will go to the advisory council. So my question is, when we have these work groups among board members, are we putting out an agenda? Are we putting out a public notice stating that we're having these work groups and that the public is invited? Because we have 2 groups, 2 totally different groups. Even though they're doing the same thing and trying to accomplish the same goal, my concern is the public.
Sure.
And is it legal for us to do that?
It is legal for the work group to meet outside of a public meeting in order to conduct some more business.
If I may, there's a reason why the work group doesn't consist of a quorum, and that's why everybody can't be on a work group. And on the 8G work group, we asked for volunteers, and we decided to keep it to 4 to make sure there was never a quorum. Now, that's no more than brainstorming ideas and thoughts on the direction the AG. All that work is then submitted either to the advisory council, which is a public meeting, or to this board, which is a public meeting. But that's just, there's a reason there's a limited number of people on a work group. If it becomes more than a quorum, if it becomes a quorum, then it does become subject to public open meetings law. So we've done that on numerous occasions, on numerous items. Whatever the work group does is not a binding piece of work. It's merely a suggestion to this board or to another council as to what they would think the direction should be. But once any binding action would take place in an open meetings law, or in an open meetings form. So, and that's why the work group consists of a small number of people.
Okay, I guess my concern is for the lack of transparency in reference
What
to...
lack of transparency?
Well, the lack of transparency would be...
We asked for volunteers on the work group.
That's
We said,
fine.
this board said we would put 4 people on that work group.
Well, I must be
The
missed that meeting.
transparency is that that work group is presenting something to this board today, which will be debated in public, which can be changed today, it can be changed tomorrow, it can be changed a month from now, all in open meetings law, in an open meeting. So I don't know what lack of transparency you're referring to.
Well, back
I
to
think
my
what you're
original
referring to is
statement...
that you're not on the work
Well,
group.
that's
what you're
an
referring
issue,
to.
but the issue at hand is that I feel that it's a lack of transparency because we
added
have
an extra
four
public
board
meeting.
members,
We have
and the
more
purpose
public-
of us
we
to
have
only
more
have 4
public
board
meetings on
members, Mr.
8G than
Romer.
we've ever had before.
You didn't want to have more than four
We've had more
board
public
members because you
meetings
didn't want it to
than
be a
we've ever
quorum,
had
so it would
before,
have to be an
Ms. Hill.
open meeting.
Point of
However,
order,
that's my statement,
Miss-
and that's it.
You have something specific to 3.3?
I was going to call the question.
Okay. Well, I think the question's been called. We can just vote. Any objection to receiving 3.3? No objection, so motion carries. We need to go back to the consent agenda because we did not have a motion to approve the remaining items on consent. Okay? Need a motion to approve the consent agenda as modified.
So moved.
Ms. Bofi, second. Mr. Garvey? What's that? Speak up. Including 6.1, okay? Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
On page 116, item 4.1, consideration of federal, state grants and allocations to LEA's Type 2 and 5 charter schools, approved non-public schools, and community-based organizations. Their recommendation is to approve.
Do I have a motion to approve 4.1? Mr. Garvey, second. Ms. Bradford. Any discussion on this item? Okay, we have one public comment. Ms. Barrios? Ms. Barrios, would you check your mic, please?
I must have a misconception of exactly what a hearing is like or an open meeting because I'm not getting answers to these questions, but I'm going to ask another one. The Special Education Fund $250,000 allocation, my first question is, why is it partnering with New Schools for New Orleans? If schools are providing special education as they're supposed to with their teachers, I don't understand why there needs to be an additional special ed fund. And I assume this is just for charters, and regular traditional schools don't get additional special ed funding, is my understanding. But how much does New Schools for New Orleans make? What percentage do they make off of this contract, I guess I call it? And also, I don't understand why it's called a competitive and why it's just for the RSD in charters.
This is a public-private match. It doesn't actually involve money going to New Schools for New Orleans. It involves New Schools for New Orleans, which is a private entity raising philanthropic dollars to match the state's contribution. So actually, the state is contributing $250,000 to be matched by private donors for $250,000. So we're using public dollars and leveraging that to generate double the money for the state's lowest income district to turn around low-performing schools. that frankly, historically, weren't really educating anybody at a high level, much less students with disabilities. So I do think that there needs to be more work there. It's to serve some of the hardest to serve kids in our state, and it's to leverage private dollars through a relatively small public investment.
I absolutely agree with you, and there seems to be a problem with serving special ed needs, but one of my questions was how much or what percentage does New Schools for New Orleans make? They don't do this for nothing, I assume.
Yes, there is no state money going to New Schools for New Orleans. And as I said, they are raising $250,000 to match the $250,000 from the state.
Any further discussion on this item? Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 134, item 4.2, contracts and leases, LESSD BSS, consideration of contracts and leases of $50,000 and over. The recommendation is to approve.
Do we have a motion to approve? Ms. Bradford? Second?
Second.
Mr. Romer? Any discussion on this item?
I would like to have clarification.
Okay. You have a specific clarification? Dr. Bieber, are
Yeah.
you just looking for general overview
I
of
want
it?
a general overview.
Okay.
A general overview of which specific?
The one on page 135, 4.2.
A petition was filed in U.S. District Court in New Orleans several months ago to seek an injunction from the legislature's passed and then governor signed law allowing students a private school or a public school scholarship if they attend a CD or F rated school in any one of 34 school systems that are currently under a consent decree from a federal court along desegregation lines. We, as a state, have challenged that petition and have, as a party to that, must retain counsel. This is an issue that is a federal court issue. It's a desegregation issue, and it is, frankly, above and beyond the capacities of most attorneys. As it's highly technical in nature, we've retained Cooper and Kirk, a firm in Washington. Much as we wish that there were attorneys in Louisiana that had this specific capacity and this level of experience on federal deseg issues, it's just not the case, unfortunately. And outside counsel is required in order to protect the rights of these kids, and that's what we're pursuing through this contract. I should just say also that, for better or for worse, when the state is sued, that oftentimes results in the need for outside counsel. This is a common thing that's been brought to the board on other occasions.
Ms. Barrios, one public comment.
I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Romer.
Have there been any attorney groups, Louisiana attorney groups, that have complained about us going outside of the state to find attorneys that can do this job? I mean, don't we have any Louisiana attorneys that could do this job? Have we had any complaints from the Louisiana Bar Association?
I've not heard of or received any such complaints.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Barrios, I would ask, and this is intended in good faith, to keep your public comments to comments. If you have specific requests, and I appreciate your concern, for information and so forth, then the staff would be more than happy, if we'll get that specific information from you to send to you.
Okay, the purpose, though, of my asking it in an open forum is so that the public, who doesn't have the advantage of being here or
Sure.
getting, plus I have a great difficulty getting responses to even my public information requests. So, and these come up when the agenda comes out. That's why I'm asking them now. With reference to the Cooper and Kirk contract, I just wonder if this lawsuit isn't misrepresented in your agenda here, because it says that file a complaint and get the state to halt the implementation of student scholarships or vouchers. My understanding, and there seems to be misunderstanding of the public, the purpose wasn't to halt the vouchers, but to get the information that the department has neglected to give to the Justice Department.
I don't mean to cut you off, but because there's a factual inaccuracy in what you're saying, I feel the need to. The petition was an injunction, An injunction is to stop someone from doing something. That petition for an injunction has not been rescinded. So however one wants to cast the political rhetoric, the fact of it is there remains not you, I'm talking about the Department of Justice, there remains an injunction on the books to cease and desist from granting scholarships as of the 14-15 year under said circumstances. So there actually is, the language in here is accurate.
Right, but it appears that it's to permanently, and that was their purpose, to stop it. Their purpose is to get the information, isn't it? And until they do,
I don't think it
needs
much
to
matters
cease.
what someone's intent is. It matters what the effect of it is. And people can say, here's what
Well,
our
I think
intent
it
is, what our
does.
intent is, but the effect of it is to stop granting scholarships to Louisiana kids in 34 school systems. That's what the effect of it is, and the plaintiff has refused to rescind that petition.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barrios. Any further discussion on the motion? Any objection to the motion?
Object.
Ms. Hill and Dr. Beebe. Next item. I do not have it. We'll check and see. Okay, we do have it. Mr. Finney, Dr. Finney.
I realize you've already voted and wasn't expecting to change any minds, but I just wanted to say that if you simply complied with federal law and acted like every school district in this state has had to for decades that are subject to desegregation lawsuits and cooperated with the Department of Justice, it wouldn't be necessary to hire this outside lawyer, at least with as much expense. So I would encourage the department to follow federal desegregation law and quit hiding the data. Thank you.
Appreciate your comments. Next item.
Mr. J, if I...
Yeah, Dr.
I'm sorry.
Beebe. Mhm.
I would just like to thank Dr. Finney for his comments, and I too agree. $150,000 in classrooms would make a difference for many students. That's my...
Mr. Garvey?
Yes, for what it's worth, I'd like to explain my understanding of the situation. I think that what we are trying to do is to get the Justice Department to follow the law. And I would suggest that we seek reimbursement from the Justice Department for these legal fees that we're incurring in our attempt to get them to follow the law.
Thank you, Mr. Garvey. We have a motion. It's carried. Next item.
Page 137, item 4.3, consideration of a report from education finance staff concerning Type 2 charter school budgets and expenditure reports, including irregularities or concerns. The recommendation is to receive.
Do I have a motion to receive? Ms. Bofi?
So moved.
Second, Mr. Romer.
Second.
Any discussion on this item?
No.
Any objection? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 140, item 4.4, consideration of fiscal dialogues as a result of the fiscal risk assessment processes. The recommendation is to receive.
Do I have a recommendation to receive? Ms. Bradford? Second?
Second.
Ms. Bofi? Any discussion on this item?
Yeah, I have a question.
Mr. Garvey?
Maybe for the superintendent, unless the staff is here. It says that the budgeted fund balance for 2013-14 is projected at minus 50% of general fund. Are they eating into the general fund? They're eating half of the general fund? Is that
Correct. We saw
I thought they already had a negative balance in their general fund.
Sheila, if we want to, or if Beth is here to speak to the specifics of it, we can talk to the specifics amount of this one CMO.
Good morning.
And I'm
Beth
particularly interested because this school seems to be doing this year after year after year, having problems like this.
They do have they are eating into their general fund balance they did have.
But they do have a positive fund balance right now?
No, they do not. So the budget, not the current operating, but the budget that they supply to us as they're required, bring us some concern, so we're working with them to help them restructure their budget so that they can overcome the potential of this deficit spending.
Do you feel like there's a possibility that they can overcome this?
Yes, I believe. We're working very closely with them and working with their financial people.
Okay. Please continue to keep a close eye on them.
We will.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sienna. Ms. Garvey. Any further comments on 4.4? Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 142, item 5.1, consideration of a report from the Education Finance staff concerning Type 5 charter school budgets and expenditure reports, including irregularities or concerns. The recommendation is to receive.
Do I have a motion to receive?
So move.
Ms. Bofi, second. Ms. Bradford. Any discussion on this item? I do have one public comment. Ms. Berrios? Thank you. Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 149, item 5.2, consideration of RSD contracts and leases of $50,000 and over. The recommendation is to approve.
Do I have a motion to approve?
So move.
Ms. Bofi, a second? Second. Ms. Bradford. Any board discussion on this item?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
I just wanted to, I think those on page 158, 159, so these, in essence, are new contracts beginning effective 2013. So that's the reason for the contract amount and the amended. Oh, I see, it's new contract.
Mm-hmm.
So these are all new contracts?
Yes.
That we're being asked to approve.
Mm-hmm.
There are no amendments to the dollar.
There are a couple of amendments. You'll see the item on 154 is an amendment, 153, 152, 151, 115 earlier. There are 5 amendments.
Okay. Thank you.
Phoebe? Any further discussion? Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
On page 168, item 5.3, consideration of an update report on RSD capital projects. The recommendation is to receive.
So move.
Ms. Bofi, second. Mr. Garvey? If I would, Lona, if you wouldn't mind coming up and just, I think it is a good time with the progress you're making within the RSD to just give us a general overview of where you stand. And I know there's been a lot of hard and good work done, and
Good morning. My name is Lona Edwards-Hankins. I'm the Executive Director for Major Capital Projects. So we are about a third of the way complete with projects in the master plan. We have another third of our projects that are in construction. We actually have about 1 million square feet that is under construction now. And with your approval of the contracts to start design today, we will have started everything that we could possibly start within our portfolio of major projects. We will bring a few more contracts to you in at the December BESE for refurbishments and for some of the projects that we can't get to because we're either lacking swing space or we don't have land to build the new schools on, so we want to manage those kids now. So we're essentially, moving pretty rapidly.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your input. Superintendent Dobar?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, committee members, good morning. Patrick Dobar, Superintendent, Recovery School District. Now, I was just coming up, Mr. Chairman, just in case you had any further questions, but I just wanted to commend Ms. Hankins and Mr. Baudelaire, our Chief Facilities Officer, for the way that they've managed this and really done an excellent job, and we've moved everything that we could possibly move at this time, and also in conjunction with OPSB. So we appreciate you, the leadership, and the guidance you've given us, as well as other board members. So thank you for that.
Yes. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, if I might as well, I want to thank Mr. Dobart and Ms. Hankins and Mr. Bordelon as well. And I do want to also say that as Lona said, there are some projects where we still have kids in the building, we will then be moving those kids out of that building in a temporary, once we have other buildings built and building those. But the amount of progress over the last several months, in spite of what's a tough market right now, has been fantastic, and I commend them for this report. And thank you, board members, for the time.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Mr. Rowland?
Yeah, I appreciate the report. I know, not exactly this item, but at the RSD meeting in New Orleans, we got population estimates, and they're updated, and in many ways they're exceeding what the original estimates were. And I know we're coming upon a time where we will review the master plan and the different phases of the master plan. At this moment, do those projections make you think those plans need to be altered? I mean, obviously I can't hold you. You may review and think that, but at this moment, do you think, based on the information you're seeing, that they're going to need to be changes, or?
Yeah, good question. And so we've been digging in conversations with that. I would say that roughly 85% of the projects that came out of the 2011 amendment, I mean, if we just think numbers, maybe like about 70 projects, are, as Ms. Hankins said, underway, whether it's just through design and moving on. That leaves us with probably less than 10, so 15%, to where we're looking at it in a space of time that, one, we have to wait on swing space, so some of these won't move for a couple of years because there's just nowhere to move the kids. And then two, yes, projecting within the budget as we have for possible escalating costs. I think revisiting and opening up would then make us have to go back to the majority of the other projects, which I don't think anyone wants to see. So my answer would be no, we don't believe we would have to reopen it. But I think what we do have to do is be very clear about what we prioritize towards the end of where projects are at, and then just figure out how we can continue working collectively using things such as new market tax credits, historic tax credits, to leverage more revenue in case there are additional increases that might not be able to cover what we consider to be a smaller amount of projects. And then also with that, this was a recovery plan. And we have to keep that in mind, because we say school facility master plan, but it being a recovery plan, it's to recover back for where we were based off 2005. And we made one stab at it, and then the next step was to have the amendment, which we're honoring. And I think if we can just see through the honoring of every student in a new, renovated, or refurbished building through that amendment, but then it's up to us as the city of New Orleans to then figure out long-term where the revenue sources will come from to really have a true master plan. And that's been the conversations we've been having with OPSB. So hopefully that answers your question. And we're definitely looking at it.
Superintendent Dobar, just curious, what do the student numbers look like relative to pre-Katrina numbers? I mean, you have a feel for that in the overall system?
Yeah, well, obviously, I mean, it's just since, I guess, 2006, let's just say right post-Katrina. So pre-Katrina, it's a significantly lower number. But we're projected out, we're well over 30 plus thousand kids. And Ms. Hankins has given me, so anywhere between 65,000 and now about 45,000. And so what we're trying to do is, as you see the city growing, those projections have come up in different parts of the city where the projections are much higher. So we're thinking about, getting closer to the 50,000 mark or so.
Skia?
Yes, Mr. Garvey.
Yeah, a question for Mr. Dobart or maybe for Mr. White. I thought I saw within the last 2 weeks that the Orleans Parish School Board entered into a settlement with one of their insurance companies, one of their insurers, for a significant amount, several $1 million or several tens of millions. Do you remember how much that was?
No, right now, no. It's really the amount in the last settlement is not. It's in conjunction with the estimate was of other insurance cases. So there's like a number of cases that have been litigated, and they're basically in a court registry because of the outstanding Oliver litigation, which that money has not been able to be actualized upon. So it's a combination of cases, and that's the number that was reported. That's a projection.
So it's not money that we were not expecting? It's not new money that could help with...
It could be, but again, that money is still tied up in other litigation. So to project out saying you could use it, it would not be true prudent at this time due to the outstanding Oliver litigation.
Thank you.
Dr. Beebe?
Thank you, Mr. Giai. Superintendent Dobord, recently I met with a group of concerned citizens in New Orleans regarding the George Washington Carver School. And so how do we address the priorities? Because, you know, I see new construction projects, then I see this particular facility, and I do know, and in fact it's in my automobile, I have a project board where there's a depiction of the George Washington Carver School in New Orleans and the one in Alabama. 8 years post-Katrina, Alabama has a nice facility. This school, as it's depicted in the photographs, there are the weight equipment and so forth, mold, pictures of mold and so forth, and our children are attending the school.
So there's no mold at George Washington Carver. The students are in modulars. I actually met with the students this week. That's one of our schools that's transitioning. And we're working on what their senior year experience will be about next year. As far as the high school being developed, that school in January, we'll have a contract assigned. We just went to bid. We're finalizing that process. They're going to have a new state-of-the-art building, which in fact the Carver Alumni Group has worked with us on the actual plans for the drawings of the building. And it's also going to be a part of the development of the Sidney Collier campus for Delgado. We have a great, ideas in place, and that's going to be actualized and groundbreaking, anticipate not too late after January, so we're on target with that one. That was the project, if you remember, maybe about a year ago. It came out like 30% over what we had budgeted, and so it took this much time to get back to the place of reducing the scope of the project, and then now getting it to a place where we've gotten satisfactory bids. So we're excited about the bids, and in January we'll be moving forward.
So when is the anticipated date of completion?
What is it, Lona? 22 years. So it'll be January 16th.
So the children are not in those conditions depicted?
No, ma'am. None of our students are in any buildings with mold or anything that would be unsafe.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have a question for you, Mr. Dubois.
Yes.
In the last RSD meeting in New Orleans, some parents came in reference to concerns of John McDonald. In reference to mold.
Yes, again,
and I requested documentation stating that it has been inspected and that
there was never any mold in that building. We've talked with her name is skipping me right now, repeated times, but the building is safe for occupancy. We have all the documentation. Yes,
okay.
ma'am.
Well, I requested in the last.
Oh, you would like the information? Okay.
Yes.
We'll see
so
that
I'm
you
requesting it again.
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
Ms. Hawkins, Superintendent Doar, thanks so much. I think this is a big deal, and y'all are doing some great work, and appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Appreciate you being here. Is there any objection to approving 5.3, the report? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 218, item 5.4, consideration of the appointment of members to the Master Plan Oversight Committee. The recommendation is now to delete the item from the agenda.
Okay, so we have a recommendation to delete. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Mr. Garvey, second. Ms. Bophy, is there any objection to deleting 5.4?
I do have a question. Why are we deleting it?
This was supposed to have been considered at an Orleans Parish School Board meeting on October 10th. However, one member of the school board in Orleans said that she needed more time to consider it. This board was not to take this up until after OPSB had taken it up, and so we're waiting on them to take it up at their meeting.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Dr. Beebe?
How are these are they nominated to serve they're nominated by school board members from Orleans Parish School Board? How do we select this committee?
These appear to be nominated by groups.
They
represent groups.
I'm told that in your exec rec is a listing of the nominating process, but it is there. So you'll see that there are a number of affiliations affiliated groups that are charged with making those nominations. I believe these two are nominated by the Urban League and ABC, I believe. Yeah.
Well, I guess my specific question would be then, who designated these entities, if you will, to nominate these individuals?
I believe this is a board-created, Orleans Parish and BESE created set of regulations agreed upon when this group was chartered.
So, Ms.
Just to clarify, this board has been in existence for many years. This is not a recent board. All we're talking about here are just appointments to the board. Of course, we're also recommending that you delete this item so that it can be considered at a later meeting after the Orleans Parish Board.
Okay, but I just want to gain a clearer understanding of the process. So do we have parents included on this oversight committee?
Who would be appropriate to give a clarification on the committee? Superintendent Dobar? Because I understand that there's specific groups and then they nominate.
Mr. Chairman, as I recall, in 2008, the BESE Board passed a resolution listing out the parties that are there as part of the Master Plan Oversight Committee. If memory serves me correctly, the Common Institute played a role as an advocate for voice in New Orleans, and so the groups that landed there, the Urban League and the other entities, were what was decided upon.
But you can't tell me if they're a parent.
There's no specific parent group that's listed out. One of the ideas was they wanted individual groups to be represented that really understood like school construction. And so the genesis was around, we actually had a chairman, Mr. Paul Flower, who basically is a respected contractor who volunteered his time to help us work through the master plan amendments on things such as like the size of buildings and the size of classrooms to use for your projections. So that's the Master Plan Oversight Committee was to give more of a technical expertise when recommendations were being made regarding the overall master plan. And so that's why you see those type of expert groups being represented.
Thank you, Superintendent Dobar.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion on this item? Any objection to deleting it? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 237, item 6.2, consideration of 8G funding cycle activities, building the 8G budget for FY 2014-15. The recommendation is to approve the allocations and authorize the BESE staff to develop guidelines and procedures and review grant applications.
I would like to propose an amendment to what we have here and then talk about it.
Okay.
So the only change that I would propose that we make is for the area that talks about the student enhancement block, that it would be 10.2 million, which is what the current allocation is. And so I'll wait to get a second and then I'll discuss it.
Second.
Okay, Ms. Bradford, second. Motion by Ms. Bofi, seconded by Ms. Bradford. Let's open it for discussion.
Okay. So if I may, Chairman?
Yeah, please.
The AG work group started in, I guess it was June. There are a number of steps to come up with our 8G budget. This was something that we've discussed earlier in the year. When we think about 8G and we think about our responsibilities as a board, we believe it's important that how we spend our dollars matches up to our strategic plan. And so what's really fascinating, and if you look back at the materials in your packet about how our districts spend their money, you see that the districts are really strategic with spending, and they're spending on things that are priority areas that the board identifies. But the way that we figure the budget and allocate the funds is not necessarily strategic. And so we had a number of discussions in the work group because we believe, I mean, if you look at the funds and where they go, most of the funds go to pre-K. And I'm not sure that you'll find anybody on this board that doesn't think early childhood education is a priority. And so there's this huge gap between the fact that our districts are thinking about this money and using it to have a great impact on students, but as a board, when we take $24 million, which will be the allocation for this year, if the board chooses to pass this recommendation, when we think about that $24 million and the way that we divide it out, it doesn't necessarily have the kind of impact that we know as board members we need to make in order to make progress. So for instance, I love the fact that our districts spend money on pre-K. I'm a little troubled by the fact that we have 8G dollars that are intended to serve as pilots or to seed programs, and that we've been doing this for 25 years. So I feel that our state needs to make a decision that we either value pre-K or we don't. I believe a lot of people in this room believes that pre-K is important to our kids. But the way that we're funding it doesn't necessarily line up with what we need to do as a board. And so you can see the process. It talks about what months and whether we met as a work group or whether we met as an advisory panel. And it was really tough to think about this. And I think that we landed in a really good spot, because after this was sent out to the public, we got even more, we had even more opportunities to engage with people and really respect the fact that our districts are spending these dollars on something that we all value as a board. At the same time, we know that we have to start thinking about how we can make 8G work the way that it's intended to work. And so I would ask that the board members today approve this proposal where we will have $24 million. We actually were going to have a reduction in funds, but looked at our reserves and are hopeful that our economy is going to turn around to where this will continue to go up in future years. We made the allocation $24 million, so we're actually looking at more funds being allocated out next year. We feel like we'll keep block the way that it is currently, but we want our districts to understand that we have to come up with another way to fund pre-K. And we looked at this opportunity to incorporate something called local competitive allocation. And so for people who've been in districts for a while, they know that we've had competitive grants before. This opportunity will provide districts with a chance to apply for grants that meet our priorities of our strategic plan and hopefully start moving us towards meeting the needs that we need for our children and start moving us forward as a board on our strategic plan. And if there's anyone else, if I left anything out, I'd be happy. I'm sure there's a lot of people who want to talk about it, but I just wanted to put that out there.
Mr. Rowland?
Yeah, I appreciate the work that everyone's done on this, and I think we got a lot of positive feedback from superintendents in terms of understanding where we'd like to go with 8G, which is we'd like it to be a strategic fund as it was originally intended to fund exemplary programs and pilot programs. But we also, they were very passionate about the current use of these dollars and how vital it is to their operations, and we agreed with them. And we discussed, had several phone calls yesterday, and they acknowledged that we want to move 8G in a different direction, but we in turn acknowledge that we want to help find a more permanent source of funding for early childhood, and that 8G is probably not the best place for that permanent funding. So this may be something that the task force, if it continues to meet over time, or as we meet with the legislature, we actually try to make early childhood a priority, as it should be, and therefore free up 8G dollars for what it was originally intended. But for the time being, I think there was some nervousness about making this change, kind of putting the cart before the horse, and so I think we would like to support the districts in that question and that request that they made of us, and put the block grant back to where it was the previous year and work with them on trying to find a better long-term solution for early childhood funding.
Dr. Beebe?
Thank you, Mr. Yeah. You know, I hear that we've had conversations with superintendents. I've had conversations with superintendents, and obviously we're getting a misrepresentation of concerns, because from those I've spoken to, they're very much in support of maintaining our block grant. We utilize numerous districts across the state, utilize these funds to support pre-K. And we all agree the importance of pre-K. In fact, I'll cite the Rutgers University research study that said that students most at risk can decrease the academic achievement by 50% when compared to their most affluent counterparts. So, and I know you have received them as well, numerous emails from across the state, individuals from across the state, not only in traditional systems, but parochial systems, appealing to us to maintain the block grant. They do not want it to be competitive. We need to be assured with all of these other choice options. We don't know from year to year, from day to day, whether we'll be able to sustain our funding source. So we know that if we are going to have positive student outcomes, you'll hear me say it often, positive student outcomes, we need the resources, ladies and gentlemen. And Mr. Roma, I need to ask you, do you know something that I don't know? Where are we going to get the additional dollars to fund pre-K? Now, you answer that question for me, and maybe you can convince me to support you in your thoughts.
Now, Dr. Beebe, just for clarification, the proposal on the table does maintain the block portion of this.
But it also has competitive in there. Why not? We just took $2 million from the 8G grant to fund course choice. Mm-hmm. And then we're making it competitive again.
Mr. Garvey?
Yeah, I don't understand. Is something wrong with competition? Is that what I'm hearing? Should we have no competition in the 8G?
Well,
Is that what you're saying?
I believe in equitable competition, Mr. Garvey, but the way you guys set up policies and procedures, it is not an equitable playing field. And I will speak up for children most at risk, those who are in need, and why not take the money, give it to our districts to help us impact our students, starting with the most impressionable, the pre-K students.
Doesn't the competitive money go to the districts?
We don't know whose district it'll go to. It's competitive.
But it goes to the districts.
But we need to sustain. I have pre-K classes within my pre-K programs within my district. If I lose out with the competition, you know what? We get individuals to review these proposals. If I'm not in lockstep with Superintendent John White, who's to say my proposal will be accepted? That's my point, Mr. Garvey.
Mr. Romer?
Well, you know, we have made a change to put the block grant back to the same allocation it received last year. And I think that was meeting what the request was from the superintendents I spoke with. I do think there's merit to a competitive aspect of 8G. I do think we want to move beyond. We don't want 8G to be used purely as a supplement to operating budgets. I mean, that's what we're saying. But we also recognize that these monies are used for valuable services right now, and therefore we're not reducing the amount of money going to block funding. Now, I can't tell you where the other source for early childhood is going to come. Now, what I'm telling you is I'm willing to go work with the legislature and the task force and the districts to go try to seek a permanent funding source for early childhood, which is different than what we've done in the past, which is beyond what we've done in the past. But in the meantime, until we get that piece of the puzzle solved, what I said is what's being suggested today is we will maintain what we maintained last year. And in between now and the next session, we will work with superintendents, and we will work with the legislature, and we will ask the governor, and we will try to find a more permanent source of funding for early childhood in this. And I will say the timing of this is appropriate to have this conversation because we will start getting more feedback from the pilot programs that are going around the state, and we'll have a better idea of what our costs are to truly provide these services in a high-quality manner. So I actually think the modification we're making today is the right one. It maintains districts where they currently are maintained, but we're expressing two things. One, we do want 8G to go back to what it originally was intended to do, which was to fund pilot innovative programs. And number two, we're saying something different than we've said in the past. is we don't think 8G is the best source for funding early childhood education in this state. And we ought to go ask our state and our stakeholders to stand up for those early childhood programs and find a permanent source of funding for them. I actually think it's a step in the right direction, a very positive step, and I'm not 100% certain why you object to it, but I appreciate that nonetheless. Thank you.
As a point of personal privilege, I'd like to recognize Representative Smith, Representative Barrow. We're going to have public comment in a minute, just recognizing that you're here, and Representative Honore. Thanks for being here. I'm going to go to public comment, and Representative Smith, since you were on your way, why don't you come on up and... Good morning.
I don't think you're on, Pat. I don't think so. Try it again.
There it is. Well, good morning to all of you. And as I sat listening to the conversation regarding AG money, I just have, I know I have a question, but maybe I'll put it in my comment. But the most important thing is we have AG money that is being used by our public schools. But do we not give block grants of AG money to parochial schools? Mm-hmm. Do we make it competitive?
We actually, with our local districts, get a base. They get a base of 8G, and they get a per pupil allocation.
But do we make it competitive? Do we ask them
Block
to
isn't competitive
compete?
for anybody.
But do we make them, what you're getting ready to do right now is to take AG money and make it competitive among our traditional public schools. And if we're not on level playing fields, then I think that's the wrong way to go. I think if you're going to make it competitive, it should be competitive across the whole AG grant monies and have the same application for everybody that gets the money. But I'm sure you're not going to do that. The other thing,
let's clarify that, because that's a good question. Ms. Bophy, would you clarify the block grant versus the competitive piece, please?
Well, block has a couple of pieces. It has the per pupil allocation, which is allocated for every student in the state, whether that be a student at a public school or a student at a non-public school. Then in addition to that piece of block, we also have what's called block base, and Kim, jump in if I mess it up. So we have block base, and so districts get a set amount for being a district. Now, with the competitive piece, and I think what Representative Smith might be talking about is there was a 1995 consent decree that limited the spending of these 8G dollars in non-public schools. And so something else I think is really important for us to discuss today, and I apologize if I missed your point, Representative Smith, but something else I think is important for us to discuss as a board is what do we have to do to get clarification on this 1995 consent decree and make sure that we are being equitable. I would argue that there's inequities in the way that the system exists and has existed. I'm not sure that what we have here clears up those inequities, but I do have hopes that our board will move in a direction to where we do equitably allocate, and not equitably from the sense of we're dividing everything out even, because where I struggle with this as a board member is that if I have $24 million and I divide that out for every student in the state, I couldn't even send them to the movies. But if I have $24 million as a board member and I say that there are priorities that I want to address, then as a board member, I can think about what those priorities are and figure out how to address them. In the sense of pre-K, that was making a decision about whether or not pre-K even worked. So we have lots of data on pre-K. We're going to get even more data from the pilots that are going on. And any other area where we have questions. Maybe the question is with teacher recruitment. Maybe the question is with teacher retention. Maybe the question is with leadership. We're asking our leaders to do a whole lot more today than we did 5 years ago. So that's where I'm coming from as a board member. If we continue to divide $24 million up by the over 800,000 kids in our state, we don't have a whole lot to show for it, and that's what I think we need to work on.
Thank you, Ms. Bogan.
well, and I understand that piece of it, but I still feel that if it's going to be something that you're going to look at and change, and not necessarily changing, but making a commitment to allow competitiveness in the public schools, then it ought to be a level field that everybody gets. That's the way I feel about it. If it's going to be a block grant, it should be the block grant going down, and let the districts decide on how they're going to use that block grant. But the other part of that is that we just recently turned down an application that we had from the federal government that was for pre-K. We did not timely put that application in. And then in looking at that, it may not have expanded pre-K, but you could have used it as enrichment and then use your HE funds for other things in the pre-K programs. So we have to look at how this board is actually working itself into sometimes a hole because of the fact that they don't do things in a timely manner. And we want the world. Pre-K is the greatest thing that we should be having in this state. But unfortunately, it's not considered the most important thing because it doesn't get funded. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Smith.
Mr. Gio.
Turn your mic on, Ms. Cook.
It is, if we could just clarify something quickly.
Ms.
For the way the work group has structured the local competitive, it is meant to be open to anyone who would be a recipient of a block grant. So public systems, city school districts, the non-public systems, independent schools, charter schools would all be eligible to apply under that as well. And their applications would have to stick to whatever restrictions might be upon them as a grantee, but the work group did not intend for the competitive only to be for local school districts or something like that. It was meant to be for anyone eligible for block.
Thank you for that clarification, Ms. Coke. Mr. Richard Bordelon with the Louisiana Conference of Catholic Bishops. You going to tag team? Okay, Dan. Yeah,
Danny Lohr, Executive Director of Louisiana Conference of Catholic Bishops. With me today is Richard Bordelon, who's our attorney. He's going to talk about some more of the legal details of what I'm going to talk about in general.
Mr. Lohr, if you don't mind, if you could get a little closer to the mic.
Certainly.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. We're concerned about the competitive grants in the sense that religious schools are not able to compete on a level playing field with the public schools because of the restrictions placed on us by the consent judgment entered into in 1995 in the case entitled Hodgins versus Louisiana State Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. As a result of that consent judgment, pervasively sectarian schools, as our schools have been called, are severely restricted in applying for competitive grants. As just one example, we can only apply for textbooks and audiovisual materials under $250. Our experience is that competitive grants are given by BESE to programs that are new and innovative, and there is little new or innovative about textbooks and inexpensive audiovisual materials. Thus, we rarely get competitive grants. Richard has recently taken a close look at the 1995 consent judgment. He believes that, in effect, it was overturned by the United States Supreme Court's 1997 Agostini and 2000 Helms decisions. Therefore, we believe we should not be constrained by the limitations of an out-of-date consent judgment that restricts our ability to win competitive grants. Our schools should be able to do as the public schools do. That is, be able to submit for BESE competitive grant review a full range of activities and programs that will enable us to better serve our student population and not be restricted because we are called pervasively sectarian schools, which is an outmoded label. I'll now ask Richard to explain the legal aspects of the situation in more detail.
In 1995, when the consent judgment was entered into, the law as construed by the U.S. Supreme Court was completely different than it began to be changed after that. In 1997, the U.S. Supreme Court actually overturned an earlier decision. In the Agostini case, the U.S. Supreme Court basically said, no, we were wrong 10 years ago, and we believe that as long as neutral criteria are set up and there's no evidence of government indoctrination, that public school teachers can go into parochial schools and provide remedial education. 3 years later, in the Helms case, involving a federal program where the federal government distributed funds to state and local governments, which in turn lent educational materials and equipment to public and private schools, there was again a challenge under the U.S. Constitution, the First Amendment, as to whether that was an establishment of religion. And again, the U.S. Supreme Court said, no, it's not an establishment of religion. This whole program has been set up under neutral criteria. The only concerns that we have are whether there is governmental indoctrination and whether the program defines recipients by religion. The court looked at it, looked at the neutral criteria, looked at the secularity of the program, and said, nope, this is not violative of the First Amendment. This program can go forward. That case, there was a plurality opinion with Justice Thomas, 4 justices, which went a little bit farther than Justice O'Connor wanted to go. Justice O'Connor was the author of the 1997 Agostini decision. And basically, when you look at this, what the Supreme Court said is, if you set up a program where it's secular materials and it's set up on the basis of neutral criteria where everybody can apply, then that's constitutional. We would submit that when you look at the 1995 consent judgment, and it talks about pervasively sectarian schools, which the Helms case completely said, finally, we're getting rid of this label of pervasively sectarian schools. We would submit that the 1995 consent judgment is outmoded. It's no longer in line with the constitutional principles of the United States. Louisiana Supreme Court has basically said that the Louisiana Constitution follows the First Amendment in regard to the decisions of the Supreme Court, and therefore we would ask that this be revisited and looked at to see if the 1995 consent judgment can be changed so that, as Danny has said, the religious schools can have a level playing field in regard to these competitive grants.
Thank you for your testimony. It's obvious something that'll have to have some follow-up and discussion. Thank you so much for making us aware of that change.
Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Ms. Berrios?
Lee Berrios, St. Tammany. I just wanted to respond to Mr. Garvey's question, what's wrong with competition? Public education is symbolic of the very foundation of democracy. Competition is good in the right place at the right time and for the right reasons. But our job is to serve every child every day. Free enterprise loves competition. It's the dream of free enterprise to capture the billions of dollars in public education money. These things should not be competitive. Just like our MFP, the direction our MFP is going, to make students' performance a part of the condition of the amount of funding that they get, like the gifted and talented and the special ed. That should not happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Berrios. Mr. Cancian, Iberville School System.
Mr. Chairman, can you call up multiple people at a time?
But they're different organizations, Ms. Bofi. I'd be happy to, but we just have a few. There's 3 or 4. Okay.
Thank you very much. Ed
Yes, sir.
Consian, Superintendent of Iberville Parish. We concur with the amendment. Thank y'all. But we would ask you to consider even more funding. Pre-K is the only thing I think everybody in this room agrees on, is that it is our way of embracing Common Core. We got to start down there. At least when you start funding 8G for pre-K purposes, it's something to hold on to in terms of what Superintendent White says about braiding money. Title I, special ed, this, Head Start, braiding money. You give us a sense of hope. Last year we received $102,000 in this grant. This year, $88,000. So thank God for the amendment, but we really need more money in here. We would love to have 2 pre-K programs in Iberville that would allow us to braid more money. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your input. Scott Richard, School Board Association.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to comment. Really just would like clarification on the proposal that's put forth before you today. Am I correct in understanding that the block grant amount would remain static and would not decrease, so therefore local districts can anticipate a stable allocation as compared to this year versus 14-15?
Yes.
So that current level of funding will be maintained, and districts can rely.
As per the vote today. Now, you know 8G. This is the beginning. And the intent is to maintain it as it is currently.
Because it is one of the few reliable, dependable funding sources that districts can count on. To ask districts to rely on a competitive grant as a stable funding source for budgeting for pre-K is very, very unreliable, so to speak. And while I appreciate the comments, and the school boards across the state appreciate the comments regarding the intent of 8G being innovative programs, we all know that a large chunk of 8G dollars go to statewide testing. We would also like to see perhaps that testing allocation from 8G be shifted to another funding source so more dollars can be put in the hands of local decision makers to be innovative or to fund pre-K programs. We all know that these dollars have been reduced year after year after year. And I'm here to ask that on behalf of school boards across the state that we at least try to maintain that current block grant status so districts at least can rely on a dependable funding source for next year. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Jim Malone, St. Charles Parish School Board.
Thank you, Jim Malone, St. Charles Parish. And Mr. Chairman, I said I wasn't going to speak, and I wasn't, but I do, number one, appreciate that y'all have put the money back in for the block grant. The only comment that I wanted to make is a concern going forward for the future and the comments about the pilot programs and the need to move it. I appreciate Mr. Romer's comments to support trying to get additional funding from the legislature specifically for pre-K programs because we all know the importance of it. But as I think the department can understand the plight that the districts are in, we're dependent on this funding. A lot over the past 10 years, a lot of the state funding that we were receiving has been cut. MFP has been held, and we appreciate that. But other programs that were funded outside that we're now having to fund locally because of cuts to the state. And y'all have experienced the same thing. And for that reason, that's why testing has continued in 8G. So on one hand, you're telling us we need to find other sources to do it, but at the same time, y'all are using this every year, year after year for testing because your funding's been cut also. So yeah, we're in the same boat. We're all have a small pool of money, so we just ask that that block continue until we can find another funding source. Thank you so much.
And just thank you, Mr. Malone. Just to clarify that comment as well as Scott's, I believe you all is actually us, the department, who also is allocated dollars by the board. And so we would experience some of the same challenges you're expressing. Agreed. I just want to make sure that we're separating those two in this case.
Right. Yeah, I was talking about the department.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Malone. Yes, Mr. Roman.
And I would say, we concur with your comments. That's why we made the change today that we did. We don't think it's an ideal situation for either party or the state. So what we're expressing today is, hey, we recognize the importance of this, so we're going to hold it steady. But at the same time, we're going to try to find a different source, permanent source, so that we could free up dollars. And that may include testing and other things. If we could free that up, that'd be great as well. So we appreciate your comments. Thank you.
James Finney.
Good morning. I forgot to say last time, but I'm a parent from Baton Rouge. It seems as though there is apparent consensus that pre-K, perhaps even universal pre-K education is important. So it would seem reasonable and appropriate for this board to go on record as saying that that needs to be added to the minimum cost of publicly funded education and shift pre-K programs entirely to MFP and let 8G be used for more interesting things that are not standard, routine, everyday, and expected. But that's not why I turned a card in. I turned a card in because 2 months ago I sat here and suggested there was important information not disclosed with respect to course choice. And Mr. Chairman, you suggested I send Mr. White a list of those things that I thought would be important to share. So I did so on August 14th. I'm still waiting for my answer. I followed up with a public records request more recently. I got a little bit of a response, very insufficient. I'm still waiting. Transparency is important. When you're spending a lot of money, it's a nice thing if you are able and willing to tell the taxpayers how you're spending the money that's intended to be used to benefit public purposes. Thank you.
Appreciate your input. Any comment?
Just a comment. As you know, Dr. Finney, you send a lengthy comment now, request for information most days. So I will take the August 14 date, and I would ask our staff to please send an email today to Mr. Finney detailing how we responded to his August 14 request. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Any other comment cards? Any further discussion on this item from the board? Mr. Lee?
I need to ask just or get some clarity on some fairly basic questions. The 8G allocation for the year 12-13, can somebody tell me how much that was?
Kim?
How much was the allocation for?
The allocation for 12-13 was 24.5. 24.5, the total allocation.
Okay.
What is the allocation? I'm sorry.
And for the year 13-14?
13-14, the allocation was 23,343,000. 23,343.
Okay, so we are anticipating some increase for 14-15.
The treasurer's report estimate, was 21.1, and then the board added from carry forward 2.9, so we're at 24.
But the amount
is a little bit more.
The amount that will be available for allocation
for 14-15 is, yes, a little bit more.
Will increase from 23.3 to 24.
That is correct.
I don't see on page 238 that has the categories, the breakdown between
each one of the allocations.
What's being distributed to local versus statewide.
It's on 239.
Pardon me?
On 239.
Page 238 is where I'm looking at the.
Okay, well, on 238 as well, they have the recommended allocations by funding methods. They have the student enhancement block, statewide competitive.
But I don't see the breakdown between what's being allocated. You know, for years, we've had 50% going to local
I see,
school
you don't see the
systems
percentages.
And 50% for statewide. I don't see that.
And I think it's because this year there was a proposal for ranges.
Are you saying we are moving away from the 50-50 allocation?
I would say
it depends on what kind of response we get from the competitive grants. So if we get a huge response from the competitive grants and everything that's allocated in that range would go to districts, then it would impact what the actual percent looks like. And since this is the first year that we're going to have competitive grants, and I'm not sure how many years it's been since it's happened, we don't have a way of knowing what the interest will be.
I'm not sure that the original intent for 8G, I thought the purpose was that it be for innovative projects. Is that accurate?
Yes.
But it sounds like that's now being combined with competitive. See, I'm at a bit of a loss. I don't see why we could not continue maintaining the 50-50 allocations and still have categories for the local school systems, 50%, that they be innovative type projects. And I think that's was the categories that have previously been used. I'm a little concerned if we would just completely abandon the 50-50 method of allocating the 8G funds.
I haven't done the math since there's been a change, Mr. Lee, in the way that we're looking at it. But I think the possibility would be that it would be more tilted towards the districts. If we were to take the proposal on the table, I can sit here and do a little math and get back to you if you want to proceed with the discussion.
I guess part of my question is, this is a recommendation that this be approved. I'm still leery that we're talking about no longer maintaining the 50-50 allocation of these funds.
Well, I think it would be Superintendent White who would be more concerned, because it looks like if somebody was going to look at a decrease in the percentage, then it would be the statewide and not the local. So if we do, because you have to take out the management pieces.
You do. You have to take out the management and oversight. And then like in fiscal year 13-14, it wasn't quite 50-50. A block received 43.7%, and then statewide received 52.3%. So,
well, but that was just a one-time.
That was a one-time thing. And then before that, normally what would happen, management and oversight would be taken out, and then the remaining amount would be divided between statewide.
And I'm not trying to get into who's advantage or disadvantage.
Correct.
I'm a little more concerned about changing what appears to be changing from what we've always done without real clarification of that's what we're doing, and putting so much emphasis on competitive when competitive,
so I guess
competitive can be pretty subjective.
Ms. Bofi?
Well, and I would, Mr. Lee, I think it would be good for us to discuss the difference between innovative and competitive, because in my mind, I see having competitive as an opportunity to introduce both innovative and also aligned with our strategic plan. And that's, at the end of the day, that's where I want us to get to, is to where we're spending money based on our priorities. And the way that I see it now is we're taking $24 million, that's what we anticipate the allocation will be, $24 million, and we're dividing it out so far that we can't say that we're moving the needle on education in our state.
I don't have a problem with anything you're saying, except I don't see the necessity to move away from the 50-50 allocation that we've had and has worked, as far as I know, for a number of years. And it gives some assurance to both the State Department of Education and to local school systems as to what they can expect with their allocations.
Mr. Chairman?
And this is just completely removing that, and I'm leery about doing that.
Mr. Garvey,
I think we could have.
Excuse me, I thought you were finished. Mr. Lee, go ahead.
I think we can have and have had some restrictions on those 50% to ensure that there is some innovation. So we're not moving away from innovation. We don't need to move away from innovation. I just don't see the need to completely move toward competitive. That's where I think we get into trouble. I think we're headed for trouble if we do that.
Ms. Cope?
Mr. Yu, if I can just clarify for the board, the statewide program as being presented by the work group is not any different than in prior years. We just added the word competitive to clarify that any state agency can actually apply under that program, but the intent of the work group was not to change any of the parameters around that. It's not meant to be any different. and any competitive grant proposal would actually be considered by the board. Here, you could either ask the work group to review and bring recommendations, or we could bring everything to the board, however you all want to do it. But any competitive grant would be actually determined by the board.
Mr.
I
Chairman.
understand
Do we have
what
any
you
other
just
speakers?
said, but it's not. Previously, what's come to the board for consideration is 50% and 50%. Now, I don't see that here. Is it here?
Depends on what you all do.
So it is a change, a substantial change. I thought I just heard you say there was no change.
I was clarifying around the competitive language in the statewide title. That's all. I just wanted to add that clarification for you all. I didn't mean to disagree with you, Mr. Lee, on whether it's 50-50 or not. That's all I was offering.
I just think we need to understand we're looking at a substantial, complete redistribution from what has previously been done.
Am I correct in saying, Ms. Beaufort, that what's presented, if it plays out, is within 1 or 2 percentage points of 50%?
It depends on how much money is allocated in competitive grants. So let's say, like, if we were to look at the proposal here, we have a $1 to $2 million allocation in $1 million to $2 million in competitive grants. If no one applies for competitive grants, then the board would have to make a decision about whether or not that we increase block or we increase the statewide allocation. So it's really difficult to identify percentages when you don't know who's going to apply, and then even people who do apply, if they'll merit the kind of money that the grants will merit the kind of money that they're applying for.
So how has this worked in the past? Has there not been any innovation or competitive nature within the monies?
Well, the last time that the competitive program was funded, it was in 2009, 2010, and all of the monies, that were allocated at that point, they were used. They had a significant amount, from my understanding, a significant amount of, interest from stakeholders, and all of the money was exhausted that was allocated for that amount.
But wasn't it in the categories of 50% and 50%?
I do not think I have a 2009, 2010 budget, but
I believe it was, because I believe it's always been that way.
And then at that point, too, we probably had about 38 million. So it may have been, everything was a little bit higher at that point.
Dr. Morante?
Mr. Chairman, in light of the testimony that was given by the executive director and the research done by the attorney, I have a pretty lengthy motion that I'd like to make.
So you're presenting a substitute motion to the one on the floor, is what you're...
Additional.
Sounds like it.
Sounds like it.
Okay.
You can let me know.
Yeah, please.
Okay. I move that we direct BESE staff and assigned attorneys to take action to overturn the consent decree so as to treat non-public schools the same as public schools with respect to applying for AG funding. I further move to allow the BESE officers the authority to make decisions in their best judgment with regard to this matter until the BESE December meeting.
If I may, Dr. Morante, can we take that up separately?
Yes.
What we're doing right now is dealing with the funding piece, and then be happy to consider that. Okay.
If I may.
Uh-huh.
Remind me again of our timeline in the decisions that need to be made today definitively, as definitively as we can be, versus when does it come back to us for further specification? Because this is not our last time we're going to be looking at this. I want to make sure every board member knows that's clear.
Sure. Today, what we really need you all to vote on is the total dollar amount for 14-15, so 24 million or less or whatever. And then the management and oversight amount of 747,000, as well as the evaluation and review amount of 150,000. So we need those numbers. We can leave everything else loose if you all want, come back in December or whenever. If we proceed with some ranges today, our intent would be if you all want to do competitive, we'd put out the RFA, have a timeline for applications, which would be probably a return in like February, and come back to the board in April for final decisions on grantees. But that is flexible as well. We really should just set hard amounts before the next fiscal year begins. So more time is obviously better. But even this past year, the board set final allocation amounts for this current fiscal year in June. So there is time.
If we were, if I may, Mr. Chair, if we were to go ahead and do the RFAs, does that mean we necessarily have to take action on the applications? I mean, in terms of we don't have to necessarily approve them. So we could start that process and get a sense of what response we're getting. I would argue the one thing that, in addition to what Ms. Cope argued that we have to do today, which is to approve the $24 million figure, we need to approve the management and oversight figure. We need to approve the review and evaluation and assessment of proposals figure. And then the other step that I had thought was a good step to take, board members can obviously disagree, is to let the districts know that the block allocation will be no less than the $10.2 million figure, unless, of course, something catastrophic were to happen to the 8G fund. It's an estimate of how much money we would have. And then perhaps within the other categories, the reason that there was a range was to give us the option of looking at what are the different proposals and what are the different potential ways of spending money. And as we see those different possibilities, we could then specify the amounts. Now, that may or may not end up, Mr. Lee, satisfying, the 50-50 balance, but within that framework, the 50-50 balance is still possible. It's just not necessarily set in stone at this moment. Now, that may have muddied the situation more. I don't know if it clarified it any. I think there are some steps we do need to take today, but there's room outside of those steps for these issues to be filtered through.
Mr. Lee?
Is it possible for us to approve the $24 million allocation and then take care of any other questions at the next meeting?
I think I outlined, I think there's three things we have to do. I would recommend a fourth. The three things we have to do, again, is the $24 million needs to be, so that's going to be our goal for overall allocation.
Okay.
The $747,000 for management and oversight. The $150,000 for review, evaluation, and assessment of proposals. And then my sentiment is to indicate that on the block allocation it would be no less than $10.2 million, which is what they received this year, Walter, in terms of block allocation.
No.
That'd be the minimum. And then we have other categories then, as we get information, we can specify that more clearly.
As long as we say no less, then I would agree.
Are you making that a substitute motion?
Are you offering that as a substitute motion?
Well, I suppose. I mean, if that gives board members clarification and comfort as to the general direction, and that still allows us some room to look at specifics going forward as to how the remaining portions will be allocated, but it does give districts a minimum guidance, and it does give our staff the knowledge of the management is going to be in place.
Is that a motion?
Yes, that's a motion.
I second.
Okay, we have a substitute motion and a second. Ms. Bophy?
Ms. Cope, if we were to go forward with the motion that President Romer mentioned or brought up, would that give the staff the opportunity to get the districts the information they would need to apply for competitive grants?
Yes, I was going to ask a clarifying question anyway. Do we want to then set the remainder amount of that $24 million, so back out the 10.2, back out the 747 and the 150, and then we would just sort of generally say this 10-ish million or 11-ish million dollars will go between statewide competitive, local competitive, and the special project set aside, or do you want to set some sort of ranges for that?
We can come back at the next meeting and get more.
I'd like to give you my input.
Why don't you give us your input, Walter?
I think we need to prepare for the next board meeting the categories and the percentages, like we've done in previous years.
Okay. So we have
knowing that it'll be a range, because some of it's undetermined at this time.
Mr. Romer, will you accept within the motion that it would come back to the board at the next meeting with the specifics, proposed ranges, and percentages?
I think we anticipated that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay.
And yes, you have everything you need in order to proceed with.
And if we maintain the section of the motion about directing us to move forward with setting guidelines so we can put out an RFA and et cetera.
That's a yes?
If we have that language, then I think we're all set, right, Kim?
So I would add that language so they can proceed with their business.
Yes. Okay. Any further discussion? Dr.
Yeah, I have a
Beebe?
question. We're asking the staff to bring information to us at the next board meeting. Can they bring it to us tomorrow? Is that enough time for them to get that together, and we won't have to wait until the next board meeting?
We can absolutely do that. Again, just making clear that the percentages we bring will be ranges, because there's a lot still up in the air. You all might decide to not fund any competitive programs. I have no idea what you all
Why
will
don't you
decide to do.
assume we will fund competitive,
Okay.
innovative programs and put the percentages for that,
Sure.
if you would, if that's acceptable.
Sure.
Okay, Dr. Beebe?
Yes, my understanding is there was no quorum at the advisory committee, AG advisory committee, and I would ask that we get input from the legislative auditor as to what we're doing here as far as the allocations.
Mr. Chair,
Ms.
there were no
Bradford?
votes taken at the advisory council because there was no quorum. There were no votes.
My point is, I think perhaps we need additional clarification, and I would ask for an opinion or a statement from the legislative auditor's office regarding this matter, to see, there was a question about parochial school involvement, and and that's my request.
I think we're going to take that up with Dr. Moranti's next motion, but I'm not sure if that's, if we don't, then we can clarify what it is that you're.
Well, I need to know what is on the table right now is that we will defer until next board meeting.
Well, we're passing what needs to be passed for the big buckets, and then the next board meeting, what's going to happen is they're going to, and we're also putting the allocation in for the block allocation to the district so they'll know what it is. In the next board meeting, they're going to break out the specifics of the differences so that we can see the percentages. But we have to pass today, because of the timetable, the big picture piece, and then the details of some of it will come back at the next meeting.
Well, I'm like Mr. Lee. I don't support the move away from the 50-50 allocation. I mean, and then making it competitive. The question I also raise is, so we're opening it up, course choice providers, will they also be in for the competition as well?
What was the work groups?
It's competitive. You said, you mentioned the different groups who would be eligible for competition with regard to the
It's both
18
traditional and non-traditional, provided the non-traditionals could participate.
So I think you two are asking me different questions. So you have public schools and non-public schools that would be able to, and we do need some clarification about our non-public schools and the nature of their applications for competitive grants. But I think, Ms. Beebe, that I heard you say, ask a question about course choice providers. And is that correct?
Yes, course choice providers. You said, I think Ms. Cope said charters, traditional systems.
So all the people that we currently.
Yeah. So local school districts, city school districts, charter schools, independent non-public schools, and non-public systems may all receive block grant funding. All of those groups would be eligible to apply under the competitive. If someone wanted to partner with a nonprofit or someone else who is not eligible to receive block grant funding, could work with them if they so chose to then bring a proposal to the board, but no non-public entity other than a non-public school would be able to apply outright for the competitive program as the work group has set it up now.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor and a second. It's a substitute motion. Unless there's further discussion, I was going to go ahead and vote on the substitute motion. Is there any objection to the substitute motion? Okay.
Object.
Dr. Beebe and Ms. Hill object to the substitute motion, so the motion carries. Okay. Dr. Morante.
Thank you. I apologize. It's so lengthy. I move that we direct the BESE staff and assigned attorneys to take action to overturn the consent decree so as to treat non-public schools the same as public schools with respect to applying for AG funding. I further move to allow the BESE officers the authority to make decisions in their best judgment with regard to this matter until the BESE December meeting.
Second.
Okay, there's a second, a motion and a second. Just for clarification, is that the right responsible party to act on that?
I don't know what you all feel like doing in this manner. If you want to direct us to do specific legal action, we will absolutely do that. I, at this time, haven't had enough opportunity to meet with counsel to be able to say that I think that's the best legal option for you all or go through all the different legal options with you all. So I might recommend that you all direct staff to work with legal counsel to then either bring back to the board for consideration your different legal options or work with the officers to consider different legal options before choosing a path forward. That's up to you all, but at this time, I haven't had enough opportunity to discuss with counsel what we might actually need to do anything on this matter.
Dr. Marante, would you consider an amendment that would say subject to the board's counsel's approval that it is their jurisdiction to do that?
If it wasn't clear enough when I said and assigned attorneys, whoever our attorneys are.
So could it be to direct staff with counsel to investigate this matter and
Yes.
return with recommendations to the board for consideration?
That's the intent.
Yes, Mr.
I
Lee.
would make a substitute motion that we refer this to the staff in the legal department for
advice.
review and recommendation back to us.
Second.
Would you accept that, Dr. Marante? Okay, yes.
A question, if we
Ms. Bradford, second.
go that route, then the staff and the attorneys can't take any action until December.
Could not take action until it comes back after it's been investigated by the legal staff and come back to the board.
And this is the 14-15 year we're approving.
Will that give staff enough time if we don't take any action until December?
Well, to come back with a recommendation, I think that's enough time. I can't tell you or predict how long the courts might need to consider such a matter should we or any other party bring something before them on this, but
I'd like to call a point of order. Is this motion acceptable at this time?
I believe it is because it is dealing with this particular funding and eligibility for the funding. I'm going to go ahead and accept it at this time. Is there any further discussion on this motion, a substitute motion? Mr. Lee has a substitute motion.
Yes.
Can you restate that, Mr. Lee?
That this item be referred to the staff and the legal department for review and recommendation back at our next meeting.
That's the motion?
Yes.
Substitute motion.
The substitute motion. Is there any objection to the substitute motion? We do have a second. Ms. Bradford. No objection, motion carries. Next item.
On page 240, item 7.1, consideration of the BESE budget. The recommendation is to ratify and to authorize staff to submit budget request.
So do I have a motion to ratify the BESE budget?
So moved.
Ms. Bophy, a second. Ms. Bradford? Any discussion on this matter? Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 241, item 8.1, consideration of the BESE annual meeting schedule for the 2015 calendar year. The recommendation is to approve.
Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Ms. Bradford? Thank you, Ms. Bophy. Just for clarification to the staff, these pretty well align with the same timing that we've been meeting. Yeah. Any discussion? Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 243, Item 8.2, consideration of a discussion of Acts 151 and 291 of the 2013 regular session of the legislature. Recommendation is to receive.
Do I have a motion to receive? Ms. Bofi?
I didn't move.
I'll second it.
Ms. Hill? Do I have a second? Dr. Beebe? Okay. Discussion on this item?
Yes, sir. Yes, I just wanted clarification in light of the most recent legislation. And as I presented to Ms. Cope as a part of executive rec, within the executive rec, just knowing that the new laws provide that a student with exceptionalities, who are not, those students who are not pursuing a regular diploma, shall not be administered any test, and as I understand, they have the right to opt in. So I just would like to have some clarification, Superintendent White, if you will, as it relates to whether we have promulgated any rules regarding these laws.
We haven't. I think the law is very explicit, so I don't think the law needs any further explication. It does. The question then is, how do you define those kids that the law is trying to capture? And we believe that the IEP, essentially, and the transition plan involved in 8th grade and beyond, essentially creates the designation that the law is identifying. The law is saying that the kid is not on a diploma track, and the transition plan should detail that. So the question is, how do we ensure that those transition plans are written responsibly? There's not currently guidance in our state on that. Some states have very, very lengthy guidance on this. Some states have slimmer guidance. We'll be putting guidance into the field, I would estimate, in the next month on this question. We've just been preparing it. I was talking with the Special Educators Association yesterday about it, and it's just a tricky piece of guidance. But we don't believe that the board needs to make any more policy, because the law is pretty explicit as to which kids we're trying to identify here.
But again, we as districts, we will need guidance.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But it's about writing IEPs rather than about, and transition plans, excuse me, rather than about the board needing to create further rules. So yes, you're exactly right, and we'll be putting guidance out to schools as soon as we finalize it. We just haven't finalized it yet.
Okay, so in essence, as I understand it, those students with exceptionalities, if they opt in, of course, that would be punitive. If they do not perform well, then that would be punitive to districts. Yet if they choose not to, as the law says, they are not required to take the exams, then it's not punitive. You know, in that case, they don't get a 0. It's not punitive. So I'm just curious as the ramifications, if they do opt in, if our schools will face the punitive outcomes.
It's a good question. I don't have an answer for it right now. When we put guidance out, it'll detail that. But I think the law's intent, and we supported this bill in the legislature, was to have students who are, for the most part, Law 2, non-diploma bound, as categorized in their transition plan, not have to take standardized tests, and that would not count against the high school. We supported that, and we don't want to hurt schools in that process, and certainly don't want to hurt kids in that process. So the guidance will reflect it. Happy to have our policy team run the guidance by you, Dr. Beebe, as we make the policy.
Okay, thank you.
And so if we could just, Bridget, just take a note of that. Thank you.
Further discussion from the board? We have one public comment, Sean Fleming.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Sean Fleming with Louisiana Developmental Disabilities Council. And our council and a number of families of kids with disabilities supported the effort to not penalize schools and not require kids to take tests that were kind of meaningless to them. I just wanted to bring y'all awareness that this just highlights a flaw, I believe, in the entire accountability structure. And it's a concern of exempting kids from any accountability is not really the desired outcome of any of us. I think we'll all agree with that. And so that's kind of what we've had to, I guess, all settle for with this is not having accountability for some students. And so it's certainly, to me, not the perfect answer, and I just want to bring y'all attention to the fact that we need to continue to look at how we're evaluating not only students but schools and teachers, et cetera, because we've gone into this entirely academic track, and a lot of kids with disabilities have a lot of other significant needs, and parents are feeling like those things are being pushed off the table. And so I just want to put y'all attention to the discussion behind this bill that a lot of parents are having with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming.
Let me just respond quickly, just so that it sounds like this discussion is going to wrap up, just so we're all clear about this. First of all, I agree with everything that Sean said. And second, just so the board is clear, I think what Sean is highlighting is, one, if you have students who are almost inherently not pursuing a diploma, right? So we have some students who almost definitely will not earn a diploma. That raises questions about, so why are we doing this in some ways? And so I think part of this is, if I could just finish.
What are we doing, I think is...
Fair point, yes. So part of this is about looking at our diploma structure and asking for our most severely impacted students, what's in it for them that can grant them a credential that allows them to lead a productive adult life. Second, it's about testing. And because the Law 2 designation is going away, how do you best measure on a test the successes of kids? And third, in the accountability system, how do you create incentives to serve kids in the first place? We are addressing the diploma question, and I believe there's a real opportunity for students with disabilities in our diploma reforms. However, on the testing and on the accountability question, it requires us working with the federal government. And so that's in a little bit more of a halted period. But I agree with everything you said, and I just wanted to acknowledge that there's real work going on here. So thank you.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor to receive in a second. Is there any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
Page 245, item 9.1, consideration of an update report regarding the Minimum Foundation Program Task Force. The recommendation is to receive.
Do I have a motion to receive?
So moved.
Mr. Lee, second. Ms. Bradford. I'll give an update on the MFP task force. I'll keep it short. I know our committee meeting has extended for a while. What I would say is I think we've had two very productive meetings. This board had the wisdom to include on this task force on a very complex issue that's very passionate for all stakeholders, a broad range of the stakeholders from all entities that are affected by the funding of the MFP task force. Within your package, you have minutes and some presentation material from the first meeting on September the 4th, which really was more educational for some of the members, but it was talking about the mission of the MFP task force, getting testimony, where are the hot spots, and I think one thing that was pretty significant out of the first meeting was the definition that our charge needs to be finished by December to make a recommendation for the 14-15 school year for funding. So there's going to be no major overhaul at MFP is going to happen in that period of time, but I think we're making some good progress. There's some tweaking that can take place. And so what we honed after the first meeting, there are 4 areas that came out that we're studying further for those possibilities. First one being career and technical education. The second one being the at-risk student portion of it. The third one being students with disabilities, and the fourth one being the gifted and talented and how those are currently being funded. The September the 23rd meeting, we delved into the cost of the MFP. It talked about overall funding at the current levels. It gave historicals, but it also got into the factors and the weighting in the current MFP of how each of those 4 areas are currently being funded. We had public testimony again. Is it adequate? Is it not adequate? That was the second meeting. The next meeting is, I think it's the 21st, which I think is next Monday. The discussion there is going to be the local and state revenue share. What does that look like? How is it divided up? What are the levels of dollars in all the different level 1s, level 2s, level 3s? It's my hope that at that meeting, we can start getting a sense of what type of recommendations we want to move forward to the next meeting. The November 21st meeting, the fourth one is distribution of the MFP program funds. How are they being distributed out? Here's the revenue. How are they being allocated? And then the goal is at December 13th to have a final recommendation and have questions, comments, because our task is to come to this board in January with a recommendation. I want to thank all the associations and legislature and all the parties represented, specifically thank Mr. Lee and Superintendent White, who are participating on the task force for their participation and input. And that's the extent of my my verbal report. If do we have to vote on that? I mean, we do. So anybody object to this report? Okay. Motion carries. A and F is adjourned. I would say, what's the next committee? Oh, do you have a card on it? I'm sorry, Ms. Barrios, do we have a card for this item? Andrew? Would you like to comment? If you could, afterwards, give us the card so we'll have it for the record.
Really, this is quick. It's just a clarification. Lee Barrios, St. Tammany. The MFP task force for September the 4th meeting is not listed on your calendar of meetings, you know, archived or whatever, so there's no link to the agenda. I couldn't find it on that particular list. It may be somewhere else, but September 23rd was. Also, along those same lines, and I wish I had mentioned this earlier when you were talking about open meetings laws, but the Accountability Commission is also not listed. I believe they met, if that's the name of the commission. And is it an open meeting? And are all open meetings required to be audio taped?
That's a specific. Can we, if you don't mind, what we'll do is, would you check the website? Would you like to comment, Ms. Cope?
If I missed one of your questions, repeat it, because you had a couple in there. So, do all public meetings have to be audio taped? The answer is no. Per state statute, the board is required to video and live stream any of their meetings in Baton Rouge where technology is available, so we do that while we meet here. BESE policy dictates that we electronically record, so in this case, usually cassette tape record any of our other advisory council meetings. That just applies to any BESE advisory groups or task force or whatever. The Accountability Commission is actually under the Department of Education, so our code dictating procedures around those would not carry over. And I think you had another question. I'm sorry.
I think that was it.
That was it? Okay. And any of the MFP task force agendas are posted on board docs. They are also emailed out via our listserv. Notification that we posted it are emailed out via listserv. It's also distributed to all the task force members, and we do that 10 days in advance, 10 calendar days in advance.
Okay, if you just note that September 4th is missing from the list.
We'll check that, Ms. Barrios.
MFP task force.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Admin and Finance is adjourned for school innovation and turnaround.